There is something deeply backward about aircraft carriers. These are the most powerful warships ever built, floating cities designed to project force across entire oceans. A single carrier strike group can reshape the geopolitics of a region just by showing up. The combat missions they launch are extraordinary: 6-hour sorties over hostile territory, electronic warfare, precision strikes in conditions that would ground any civilian aircraft on Earth. And yet, for the past 100 years, the single most dangerous thing a naval aviator could do had nothing to do with combat. It was coming home. Landing on a carrier. That was the killer. Since World War II, a staggering 50% of all naval aviation accidents happened during landing. Not takeoff, not dogfighting, not dodging surface-to-air missiles. Landing. Trying to plant a 50,000-pound aircraft onto a 600-foot strip of steel that is pitching, rolling, and heaving through open ocean. Often at night, often in weather, often after the pilot has been flying for hours and is running on fumes and adrenaline. The most common way to die was a ramp strike. The aircraft drops below the 3-degree glide slope, and instead of catching the arresting wire, it slams into the back end of the ship. At night, ramp strikes were 3 times more frequent. In the dark, over black water, with no horizon line, pilots had almost nothing to reference except a small set of lights called the meatball, an optical landing system that told them whether they were high, low, or on target. And even with the meatball, the final 18 seconds of approach required roughly 300 corrections on the stick and throttle. 300 in 18 seconds. Every adjustment created a chain reaction. Change the speed, you shift the glide slope and the lateral position, so now you're correcting the correction, which creates another deviation, which demands another correction. Pilots called it flying on the ball, and it was entirely manual, entirely unforgiving, and it had to be perfect every single time. During the Vietnam War, researchers strapped biometric sensors onto carrier pilots and sent them into actual combat. They measured heart rate, respiration, sweat, everything. Getting shot at was stressful, but landing on the carrier at night pegged every sensor harder than combat did. That was the reality of naval aviation for decades. The mission was survivable. The parking was lethal. Then, in 2015, the Navy changed one piece of software and the entire equation flipped. They called it Magic Carpet. The concept was almost insultingly simple: the F/A-18. Super Hornet is a fly-by-wire aircraft. The controls are digital. The computer already compensates for dozens of variables during flight: wind gusts, turbulence, angle of attack, automatically, in real time. Magic Carpet just extended that logic into the landing phase. The software acts as an intermediary between the pilot and the aircraft during approach. It accounts for wind, carrier deck movement, and speed. It decouples roll from yaw from pitch, meaning a single input no longer triggers a cascade of counter adjustments. The pilot points the aircraft where they want it to go. Magic Carpet handles the physics. Those 300 corrections in 18 seconds? Reduced to single digits. A 97% reduction in pilot workload during the most dangerous phase of flight. The results were immediate and dramatic. In 2021, the Navy brought freshly winged pilots, rookies, to the USS Gerald R. Ford for their first ever carrier landings at sea, day and night. These were pilots who had never touched a flight deck before. Historically, first-time night landings produced white knuckles, shaking hands, and about a 5% disqualification rate. With Magic Carpet, the new pilots posted the best Day 1 performance in the history of carrier qualification training. Out of 40 landing attempts during one session, only a handful of bolters, where the hook misses the wire and the pilot has to go around. The disqualification rate was heading toward 0. Pilots reported less stress, more confidence, and, something no one expected, they said it was actually fun. The F-35C variant runs an equivalent system called Delta Flight Path Mode. Same principle, same results. But here is where it gets interesting. Magic Carpet is not autopilot. The pilot is still flying the aircraft. They can still make fatal mistakes. The software just removed the noise, the hundreds of micro-corrections that turned every landing into a high-stakes juggling act. Strip away the busy work, and it turns out pilots are exceptionally good at the part that actually matters: putting the jet where it needs to be. Some old-school aviators worry about skill atrophy. If new pilots only ever land with magic carpet, will they know what to do when the system fails? It is a fair question. During early testing in 2015, the software was buggy enough that it would occasionally disengage mid-approach, and pilots were required to fly a set number of manual landings to maintain proficiency. But the latest version, PLMV40, is fully redundant. It handles engine failures, control surface malfunctions, navigation dropouts, even broken throttle controls. In 598 test passes, there was 1 bolter and 0 hard landings. The engineer's answer to the skill atrophy concern is blunt. If Magic Carpet stops working, the aircraft's systems are in such bad shape that no amount of manual skill is saving that landing anyway. One accident did highlight the risk. An F-35C pilot believed he had engaged Delta flight path mode, but hadn't. He flew the entire approach in manual mode without realizing it, and the result was a ramp strike. The system did not fail. The pilot failed to turn it on. That incident did not weaken the case for Magic Carpet. It strengthened it. It demonstrated exactly how much harder the landing is without it, and how much the human element benefits from the software handling the physics. At the end of the day, Magic Carpet is a win across the board. For pilots, safer, less stressful landings, and more mental bandwidth for combat skills. For the Navy, fewer mishaps with $55 million jets. For the airframes, less structural stress from hard landings. For the carriers, fewer bolters, faster flight deck cycles, more sorties per day. Magic Carpet and JPALS are now operational on every American supercarrier. The most dangerous 18 seconds in aviation just became routine. And the irony that started this whole story? It is resolved. After 100 years of naval aviation's biggest challenge being its most mundane task, a software update finally let pilots stop worrying about parking and get back to the mission.
Imagine you have been awake for a day and a half. Not lying in bed, unable to sleep. Awake, working, watching your hands do precise things while your brain quietly begs you to stop. Now strap yourself into a seat that barely reclines, inside a space about the size of a small closet. There is another person sitting close enough to your left that you could reach out and touch their shoulder. The two of you are the only human beings for hundreds of miles in any direction, and you will be sealed in here together for longer than most people stay awake across 2 normal days. You are flying one of the most expensive machines ever built, and you have not slept in over 30 hours. This is the B-2 Spirit, a stealth bomber that can fly halfway around the planet, drop its weapons, and come home without ever landing. The flying is the part everyone talks about, but there is a quieter problem buried inside every one of those missions, and almost nobody thinks about it. How do the people inside stay awake? And when they cannot, how on earth do they sleep? The obvious question. Here is the thing that should bother you immediately. A B-2 mission can last 36 hours. Some have gone past 40. The longest ever flown lasted 44. And there is no relief crew, no bunk room, no second team waiting in the back to tap in, just 2 pilots, 2 seats, 1 aircraft that costs around $2.1 billion and cannot, under any circumstances, be allowed to crash because someone dozed off at the controls. Compare that to a long commercial flight. The longest airline routes in the world run around 19 hours, and they carry multiple crews who rotate in and out of a dedicated rest area, taking real sleep in a real bunk while fresh pilots fly. The B-2 has none of that. No relief crew waiting in the back, no bunk, no spare hands. The same 2 people who start the mission are the 2 people who finish it, however long it takes. So, the question is obvious. On a flight longer than 2 normal working days, with only 2 people aboard, when exactly does anyone sleep? And what happens to the airplane while they do? To understand the problem, you have to understand the machine. The B-2 was built for one job above all others. It had to fly into the most heavily defended airspace on Earth without being seen. Its flying wing shape has no tail, no sharp edges, nothing for radar to grab onto. Its skin is coated in materials that soak up radar energy instead of bouncing it back. To an enemy air defense network, a B-2 is supposed to look like almost nothing at all. That invisibility is the whole point. It means the bomber does not need a fleet of escort fighters to punch a hole in enemy defenses. It can go in alone, slip through, and come back out before anyone is sure it was ever there. But invisibility comes with a price. and the price is range. The B-2 was built during the Cold War to penetrate Soviet airspace, which meant it had to be able to reach targets on the far side of the planet. The solution was brute distance. Rather than base the bomber close to its targets, where it could be spotted or struck on the ground, the Air Force flies it all the way from the middle of the United States. The B-2 has a range of over 6,000 nautical miles on its own fuel, and with aerial refueling, that range becomes effectively unlimited. So the bomber takes off from a single base in the heart of the country and simply flies to wherever it is needed. Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, southeast of Kansas City, is the only operational home of the entire fleet. Every B-2 mission to anywhere on Earth tends to begin and end on that one runway. The Air Force only ever built 21 of them. The original plan called for over 100, but the Cold War ended, the program got slashed, and the staggering cost did the rest. Today, 19 remain in service. Each one costs around $2.1 billion, which makes it, by most measures, the most expensive aircraft ever built. They are flown by a small, hand-picked group of pilots, all working out of that one runway in Missouri. And here is the part that gets forgotten. The sleep problem is not solved by engineers or software or money. It is solved by those pilots, with their own bodies in real time at 40,000 feet. Let us be precise about what we are asking these two people to do. A long B-2 sortie can mean 36 hours of continuous flight. During that time, both pilots have to be sharp for every critical moment. Takeoff, every aerial refueling, the approach to the target, the weapons release, the landing. Aerial refueling is its own kind of stress. You are flying a stealth bomber a few feet behind a flying fuel truck, threading a boom into a small port at altitude, with no margin for a shaky hand. You cannot be half asleep for that. You might do it 5 or 6 times in a single mission. If you have ever pulled an all-nighter and noticed your thinking go fuzzy somewhere around hour 20, you have a rough sense of what unmanaged fatigue does to a person. Reaction time slows, judgment slips, you start missing things you would normally catch. And here's the cruel part. You usually do not notice it happening. Sleep-deprived people consistently rate themselves as sharper than they actually are. Now picture that fog rolling in while you are responsible for a $2 billion aircraft and, on some missions, nuclear weapons. That is the real enemy on these flights. Not enemy radar. Exhaustion. The airplane can be made invisible. The human nervous system cannot be made tireless. And the cockpit, for all its sophistication, was never designed to defeat fatigue comfortably. It was designed to be invisible. Crew comfort was almost an afterthought. So how do they survive it? The answer is not one clever trick. It is a stack of them, layered on top of each other, starting with the airplane itself. The first layer is the autopilot. The B-2's flight control system is advanced enough that during the long, boring cruise between refuelings, the aircraft can essentially fly itself. The wing is so aerodynamically slippery, and the computers so capable, that holding altitude and heading across an empty ocean does not require 2 sets of hands. It barely requires 1. That single fact changes everything. It means that for long stretches of the mission, only one pilot needs to be truly engaged, watching the systems, monitoring the route, ready to react. The other one is free, and on a flight this long, free is the most valuable thing in the world. Free to do what exactly? This is the second layer, and it is almost startling in how basic it is. There is a cot. Behind the 2 ejection seats, in the cramped space at the back of the cockpit, there is a fold-out cot. One pilot flies, the other clears out of the seat, lies down on that cot, and tries to grab 3 or 4 hours of sleep. Then they switch. That is the whole system. One flies, one sleeps, then they trade. It sounds almost too simple until you realize there is no other option that fits inside the airplane. The most sophisticated bomber humanity has ever built, and the sleep solution is a camp bed wedged behind the seats. And trying to actually fall asleep on it is its own challenge. You are exhausted, but you are also strapped into one of the loudest, most high-stakes environments imaginable, with the engines droning and your crewmate working a few feet away. The pilots who flew the early missions said the same thing. The cot was there. Sleep did not always come. Earlier crews reportedly made do with even less, including, on some flights, a folding lawn chair dragged into the back. The third layer is the timing, and this is where it stops being simple. You cannot just sleep whenever you feel tired. Sleep has to be scheduled around the parts of the mission where both pilots must be awake. A B-2 pilot once explained that when you sleep depends entirely on your route, on where the refuelings fall along that route, and on when the weapons activity is planned. So before they ever take off, the crew spends serious time planning who sleeps when. They sit down with the route and they map out the crunch points, the moments where both of them have to be alert and there is no room for one of them to be on the cot. Takeoff, each refueling, the run into the target, the release, the landing. Then they fit their rest into the gaps in between those points, dividing the dead hours of cruise between them. Sleep becomes a logistics problem, solved with a pencil, hours before the wheels ever leave Missouri. By the time they are airborne, both pilots already know roughly when they will be awake and when they will be flat on their back behind the seats. If this is the channel's first time covering the strange physical reality of military aviation, this is exactly the kind of detail we dig into, so it is worth subscribing for the rest. The fourth layer handles the body. There is a mini fridge, a small microwave, and a cooler packed with snacks, so the crew can eat real food across 2 days aloft. But what they eat is chosen with surprising care because the cockpit has only a tiny chemical toilet and there is nowhere to escape the consequences of a bad meal. So they keep it bland and simple. One commander who flew the B-2 for 9 years said his go-to meal was a turkey sandwich on wheat, no cheese, as plain as he could possibly make it. Snacks lean toward candy bars, and for some crews, sunflower seeds. Anything heavy or greasy gets left on the ground. There is something almost funny about it. The pilots of a $2 billion stealth bomber nibbling dry sandwiches, until you remember they are locked in that seat for a day and a half with a toilet the size of a bucket. Hydration matters more than caffeine here, which sounds backwards until you understand the altitude. At cruising height, the air is brutally dry, and dehydration sets in fast and quietly. So instead of leaning on coffee to stay sharp, which would only dry them out further, crews are encouraged to drink roughly a bottle of water an hour. The body comes first. Alertness is managed a different way. But all that water creates an obvious problem on a flight with one tiny chemical toilet. On the longest missions, that toilet simply is not enough. So crews fall back on something called a piddle pack, a sealable bag filled with a powder that turns liquid into gel. It sounds almost absurd until you understand the physics of being strapped into a seat for 30+ hours, drinking a bottle of water an hour, with a job that does not pause for bathroom breaks. Nothing about this aircraft's interior is dignified. It was built around endurance, not comfort, right down to the plumbing. The last layer sounds almost like science fiction until you understand the stakes. When training and scheduling are not enough, when a pilot simply has to stay razor sharp through the most dangerous phase of a 30-hour flight, a flight surgeon can prescribe medication. The military calls them go pills. In the past, these were amphetamines, meant to push a tired pilot past the wall that fatigue throws up around hour 20 or 30. More recently, crews have reportedly been issued modafinil, a drug that promotes wakefulness and is seen as a cleaner, steadier option than the old stimulants. These are not handed out casually, and they are not a free pass to skip sleep. They are part of a carefully managed system prescribed by flight doctors who specialize in keeping aircrew functional at the absolute edge of human endurance. There are even drugs to do the opposite, to help a wired pilot actually fall asleep on that cot when the schedule demands rest their body does not feel ready for. The pill, in either direction, is the last layer. It sits on top of the autopilot, the cot, the schedule, and the food. Together, they are what turns a physically impossible flight into a survivable one. But peel all of that away, and you are left with something no system can fully solve. 2 people, alone, for a day and a half, inside about 25 square feet of livable space. Think about what that does to a person. There is no walking it off, no stepping outside, no closing a door. The toilet is right there in the cockpit with your crewmate sitting a few feet away, and on the longest flights, even basic privacy disappears entirely. Everything that a human body needs to do across a day and a half has to happen inside that one cramped volume, in full view of the only other person aboard. That is the unglamorous reality sitting underneath the stealth and the billions. The thing that gets you through all of that is not the technology. It is the other human being. This is why the Air Force treats the partnership between the 2 pilots as seriously as the flying itself. A B-2 crew is not 2 interchangeable bodies. It is a pilot and a mission commander, and their roles, their schedules, even who sleeps in which window, are mapped out weeks before the wheels ever leave the ground. In the air, they manage each other. One notices when the other is fading. They cover each other's tasks, trade the seat, and keep each other honest about how tired they really are. They train for exactly this, sometimes spending a full 24 hours in a simulator before a real mission, not just rehearsing the flying, but watching how each other's judgment holds up once the fatigue sets in. and none of it is improvised on the day. White Man keeps its own staff of doctors and physiologists who study what these long flights do to the human body. They teach new pilots how to shift their own body clock before a mission, adjusting sleep and even diet in the days beforehand, and they keep the veterans current on the latest fatigue research. The medication, when it is used at all, sits inside strict rules. After a pilot takes a sleep aid, there is a mandatory do not fly window, a stretch of time when that pilot is barred from the controls until the drug has fully cleared. The system is built so that the person actually flying the aircraft is never the one whose chemistry is in question. On a solo flight, fatigue is your private problem. On a B-2, it is a shared responsibility, and your crewmate's alertness is partly your job. You are each other's backup, each other's alarm clock, each other's reality check across a day and a half with no one else to turn to. There is also the strange psychology of time. On one long bomber flight, a crew chasing the sun across the world got only a few hours of darkness, and a pilot described how the mind simply loses its grip on what time it is. Your body clock has no anchor. It does not know whether it is morning or midnight, whether you should be asleep or awake. And after enough hours, you stop being able to tell on your own. You are just awake. You hold on, you trust the schedule you made on the ground, and you are very, very thankful when you finally land. That is the part the spec sheets never capture. We describe the B-2 in terms of radar cross-section and payload and stealth coatings. But the thing that actually makes a 37-hour mission possible is not the airplane. It is two human beings deciding over and over for a day and a half to stay sharp for each other. The endurance is not really the airplanes, it is the crews. Now take everything we have described and watch it happen for real. In the early hours of a Sunday morning in June 2025, 7 B-2 Spirits lifted off from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. Their target was on the other side of the world, deeply buried nuclear sites in Iran. The operation was called Midnight Hammer. Each bomber carried 2 pilots. Each flew non-stop from the middle of the United States to Iran and back, refueling in the air again and again in near total radio silence. The B-2S were the only aircraft in the world that could carry the 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs the mission required, weapons built to punch through rock and concrete into facilities buried deep inside a mountain, and it was the first time those weapons had ever been used in combat. To pull it off in secret, the military even sent decoy bombers west over the Pacific, drawing attention away while the real strike package flew east. Behind the 7 bombers stood a small army, well over 100 supporting aircraft, tankers, fighters, and around 4,000 personnel, almost none of whom knew the full timing of the plan.